welcome to another ISTE Games and Simulation Hangout on Air. It's Mobile Monday, October 19th, and this is part of the Connected Educator Month series. I'm Tanya Martin, and I'm going to be your host this evening. We do have a wonderful panel of experts. Today we're discussing ARGs and Ingress in particular. We have done several sessions on Ingress. Actually, one of our panelists, Michael Flood, did an orientation to Ingress, and we'll be giving you that link a little later on. But we are focusing today on 21st century skills. And as you can see, our 21st century skills, the 4 C's, as our panelists respond and as our viewers ask questions, if you try to focus on those particular skills, because that's our focus for today. Not so much how to play the game, although you can certainly ask those kinds of questions, but the focus on how it's going to be focusing on those particular 4 skills that you see. So before we get started, I do want our audience, if you are, you know what, let's just go with introductions first. Let's go with our introductions in alphabetical order. We have Mr. Anderson.
Hi, this is Michael Anderson. I'm owner and senior editor of ARGN.com, and relevant to this group, I'm a former adjunct at Villanova University and used to contribute to a Wired Decode about this type of sort of immersive gaming and entertainment.
Our second person with the letter A isn't logged on yet, so when Thomas Arteaga logs on, we'll have him introduce himself. But Dr. Calongne?
Hello, this is Cynthia Calongne. I'm also known as Lear Lobo, and I'm almost never on camera, so this is a little eerie. Anyway, who am I? I've taught for 19 years. I teach game design. I've spoken at about 167 conferences and keynotes, and I'm a researcher, as many of you know, in VR. Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.
Our other Michael.
Hi, so my name is Michael Flood, longtime EdTech kind of community participant, work in the EdTech field at a company called Khajiit, but also a lifelong gamer, which got me into technology early and kept me all the way through Georgia Tech. And still today, if I'm not living in the past, because I do medieval reenactment, then I'm living in the future, where the technology is taking us.
Thanks, Mike. And Kay?
Hi, everybody. I'm Kay Novak. I'm the chair for the ISTE Games and Sim Network, and I really want to thank Tanya for putting this great panel together, because it's something we're really focusing on in the network. For this year, we are focusing on ARGs, and we're focusing on mobile learning and mobile games. And I think the person who wasn't here right at the beginning is here now, so I will get off mic so you can bring him on.
Okay, Thomas, would you please introduce yourself and tell us what your connection with Ingress is?
Hi, my name is Thomas Arteaga. I'm a student at Nova Southeastern University in Davie, Florida, and I've been playing Ingress for quite a while, since almost the beginning.
Okay, and we do have Chris Lukes, who's going to be watching the Padlet and giving us the questions. Chris, just say hi. Chris.
Hello, everyone.
Okay. Okay, and now those of you who are watching, before we actually get started with our questions, if you are watching the Hangout from the Games and Sim live stream, if you could just type into the Padlet maybe why you are listening to this today and why you're watching this. Is it because you play? Is it because you're studying? Because you're thinking of using this with your students? Or maybe you're just curious. And you can ask questions about Ingress as we continue with our presentation at any time. And Chris, of course, is going to be looking at the Padlet, and he'll let us know what you're asking. And if you want to ask it of a particular person, you know, kind of let us know in Padlet as well. Okay, let's start with the first question. What is Ingresss? What is Ingresss? Mr. Anderson, maybe you can answer that for us.
I see we were playing a bit of chicken with that question. So Ingress is a lot of different things to different people, but first and foremost, it's a location-based game where people are competing against each other in two factions, the Enlightened and the Resistance. And I like to compare it to, if you've ever played the board game Go, it's almost like a multiplayer version of Go, where each of the points on the Go board is a real spot in the real world, so that you are going out and fighting for control of those spots to control territory that way.
Okay, does anybody else want to add to that?
Please.
Well, I'll add. So, to me, it's a very unique type of game. It's the first game that I really played that I couldn't sit at home and play. So it really forces you to get out. It forces you to explore, discover new places. In fact, kind of the theme of the storyline behind it has a lot to do with discovery. Discovery of what become new portals, but could be historical markers or anything else. But it's the world is your game board, and you go out, you discover, and you interact with other people to kind of conquer it.
Yeah, I would like to also add, if I can, it's also sort of like a lifestyle in a bit. And I mean, through Ingress, you go out and explore new places, you meet new other agents, and you build friendships that last a long time. Like, for example, I know people in other countries because of this game, that I needed to make a field across, make a link across countries. So I need to get in touch with one person, they put me in touch with another person, and now, we're good friends and chat, pretty occasionally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to the next question. And of course, we're not going to have time to have all the intricacies, but exactly how do you play Ingress? I mean, if the first person that my sister kind of, when she sees me playing games, we used to get annoyed with me, and I had her sitting next to me in the car, and I don't think that the automobile is the place where you're supposed to play the game, but I had her sitting next to me playing the game. But how are you supposed to play the game? How do you play it, and what is this, the objective of how it should be played?
Well, the game is designed to not be played by car. There's actually is like a sort of speed limit in the game. Can't go more than 35 kilometers per hour, I believe. Otherwise, you get what we call speed lock, and you can't play. You have to wait.
Oh.
So it's really meant for people who are biking or on other slower forms of transportation, possibly on the bus, but it's really designed for like walking mostly. Going to places and actually seeing it with your two eyes while standing there, not necessarily just driving by, going, "Oh, look, that's that."
Okay, so you look at your screen and you see these locations and you walk up to them and you do what you hack them, right? You hack them and you make them yours and you take them over. So what exactly is the objective of this game? Like when they designed this game, and perhaps one of the Michaels can answer this question. What was the intended objective of these designers, and who's the audience? Who's the demographic, or is there a demographic that it's aimed for?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at part of that. And I think, at least for me, one of the things that makes Ingress the most interesting is they have very different targets based on what you're looking for out of this game. So we've already heard a little bit about physically playing the game. You pick up the app and you are hacking locations, you're defending areas, you're setting up territory, but that's only one aspect of what's going on with Ingress, where a very rich area that people can plumb into is the lore, where you can play Ingress without ever picking up the app just by going through the Google Plus postings, going through the NianticProject.com, going through all of the daily puzzles that go out and figure out what the heck is going on with this Epiphany night that started Ingress, and how can you influence the characters to either get more information or to influence things for your faction so that things are going well. One of the things that I've been hearing in game design a lot recently is after the popularity of a game called Five Nights at Freddy's, where the game itself is a simple, fairly straightforward horror game where you're just trying to avoid getting surprised by the animatronics. That game is secondary to the metagame where people are trying to figure out what the heck is going on with the plot and what is this story that's running through an otherwise simple game. You also have people who will dive very deeply into the community aspects and the artistic aspects, where what you're seeing right now on the screen in terms of things that people can do in Ingress is you've got this idea of field art where you take the same portals that people are competing against, and sometimes you're collaborating with other players, other factions, to make art that really tells a story that wasn't necessarily the intentional story.
Right, and that actually happens a lot. There's one fantastic one. I don't know if you guys had the picture for it, where it was like a moving picture. They had fireworks and everything. They killed the portals and made the portals, and then took screenshots as they went along of I think it was New Year's, of the clock moving and everything. So, and there also is it's a kind of a little known and not, how do I say, like there's not a lot of people that do it, but there's also like a cryptography aspect to it. Inside the G+ posts that the Niantic project G+ account posts every day, there's like little tiny strings of encoded codes that people who are knowledgeable in cryptography and stuff like that decode them, and you can redeem them for items inside the scanner. So there's like a third type of way of engaging Ingress agents.
Mm. So is the intended audience, I mean, I've seen the joke, you know, that it's to get gamers to get out and walk, you know, because they're so sedentary. Is that the audience? Is it the gaming audience? Is it a particular age group? Is it, you know, or is it just that wasn't even something that Niantic had in mind when they developed this game?
Well, I don't want to speak too much for Niantic, but I would say there's a couple of clues in there. I mean, first of all, it's not really for kids. You know, obviously being part of the game requires that you have, you know, kind of G+ account in many cases. You have to have an email address, obviously, so you're obviously getting rid of some demographics there. But then you have to be able to get out and travel and go and meet strangers and do things like that. So it's really not targeted at kids. Early on in the game's development, they had a number of sponsors, kind of commercial sponsors, who also tended to target sort of, you know, a young adult demographic. But I think as the game has grown and developed, the demographic has spread incredibly. So, I mean, my mom is retired and she plays, and so does her husband. And so, you know,
and are they enlightened, Michael?
What's that?
Are they enlightened?
Of course. And I would say, you know, in my area, you know, there's a very wide variety of agents, you know, but the median age probably in my area is probably late 20s, early 30s, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think you can see that there's a very distinct shift in that targeting, particularly in terms of some of the stories from players that they're highlighting. I mentioned there's a bunch of different ways that you can play the game. There's also a bunch of different ways you can follow the game. And for me, one of the primary ways I've been keeping up is they've got a number of video series. Primarily, you've got the Ingress report that's highlighting what's going on from the story perspective and what the community is doing. And then you also have Ingress Obsessed that's a bit more of a narrative version of it. And specifically with the Ingress Obsessed series, a lot of what they were focusing on were specifically the health benefits and people who were using this as a way of getting in touch with community, as a way of getting in touch with their families, and as a way of really dealing with mobility challenges they might have. And part of that is that you're seeing the targeting of they're going for a slightly older demographic. They're going for a broader audience where this is something where if you're having a community game, you bring in your friends, your family. For a couple of the events, I got to see I got to see just families where you had 3 generations playing it together.
And I guess I'm gonna just jump in for a second if you don't mind, Tanya. And this is just a comment. We were really lucky that Michael helped us introduce Ingress to our Games and Sim network this year for our conference. And so he came in on May, and of course, you know, he tried to make us enlightened, but none of us listened. But we saw this. We have a game night party at our ISTE conference, and we saw Michael come in and go and sit down with the family and explain the Ingress to the family, and he split the family. It was like the North and the South.
And they would be so much better if they were all on the same team.
But they
had all gone enlightened, it all would have worked out. Now we have, you know, it's interesting. There, as with any game, if you get into any online gaming community, much as you would see reflected in much of the internet itself, you know, there are people who take their online personas more seriously than others. Ingress is very interesting because it bridges, you know, you are out in the physical world and you are interacting with real people. And so you'll often find that people who get into the game really early, they bring their online persona to it and they become, you know, they can get easily agitated because the other team did something. But it seems to me like the longer people are in the game, they kind of mellow out. You meet people on the other side, you go to cross-faction events, you make friends, and the faction doesn't matter as much anymore. Obviously, you're still competing, but you're really kind of getting to know all the different types of people and players in the game.
Yeah, and particularly with this type of game, a lot of times you don't want to end a multi-year project by saying, hey, congratulations, Faction A won. So a lot of what happens when they're reaching the end game of the game development itself is, I suspect there's a decent chance that you're going to be seeing the unification of both of the factions, and they have a challenge of now you're playing against the game and you're trying to beat us, so that the win condition gets to be something that becomes shared. Is that going to happen with Ingresss? I don't know. Do they have an end game planned out? Yes, this always was a game that they weren't planning on having run from the story perspective forever.
Oh, so there's an end. And good segue to our next question about communication. I know when I first started, I was just kind of fumbling about, and then I found a little communication tab, and I actually started to write some things and read some things that people were telling me, and I think that's when I met Thomas, who said to me, do not put things in here because other people are going to see it, you know, from the other side, those green ones like Michael. And so I opened a Slack account, and I know that there are some other areas that also have Slack, and they use Google Hangout, and there perhaps are some other things. And if you could address, you know, the communication and how that happens in this game.
Well, I'll weigh in a little bit. Okay. You know, the communication varies a lot depending on like what the needs are of the group and the task. So, you know, some communication methods are more static and asynchronous, like sharing, you know, sharing in a Google Plus community, where, you know, posts may not be as time sensitive, things like that. There's a lot of group instant messaging tools. So that could be Slack, or it could be GroupMe, or it could be, you know, any number of other tools like that. And then there's, you know, pure real-time tools. So, you know, using voice communications, you know, things like that. So there's lots of different tools that I've seen people use to communicate, and even in some cases where the factions build and code and develop their own tools because they don't trust anything else and they want to build encryption and other technologies into them. So the community has actually developed a lot of their own tools.
Mm-hmm. I kind of wanted to touch on and I think later I talk about the missions, but are missions something that are created by individuals, or are missions created by, I think they are, right? They're not created by Niantic.
Yeah, and so the missions was a fairly recent update to the Ingress system. I had a lot of fun with that, where recently I had a conference come into Philadelphia, and I was playing around with the ability to create a puzzle trail for my friends coming into town, because the way missions are set up is you can create a series of locations within your city that says, okay, go to point A, and then once you reach there, you might need to solve a puzzle to unlock what point B is, or it could be more of a walking tour where they're saying go through these 20 different locations. And so it's really taking a lot of the technologies that Ingress uses to develop their gameplay that guides people from one location to another, and it lets people, and educators in particular, create their own paths to guide people through something, whether it be a historical walk or through just something that's a little bit more fun or entertaining.
You know, when you just said with educators and with their students, and a little earlier someone had mentioned that it's not really for children. So and you know, children is a pretty big span of, you know, little toddlers to, you know, I don't know, I consider an 18-year-old a child. So, but there is a large span. But you just mentioned, you know, going on field trips or historic things, so that there is the potential to be using that kind of thing for children.
Yes, and one of the things just to keep in mind is there is a barrier of entry for Ingress, because we're not just talking about do these people have a smartphone, we're talking about people having a smartphone with a decent data plan, where I'm on a 200 megabyte per month limit, and if I play Ingress, I will burn through that pretty quickly. We're also talking about, as people are moving towards the advanced levels of playing Ingress, where they're getting a little bit more involved, that a lot of times you're not just having a smartphone, but you're buying external battery packs. For the very intensive players, they'll actually be buying cell phone boosters, because sometimes they want to play in an area that doesn't have very good wireless reception. And so there does begin to be those barriers of entry beyond just, are you hitting the 13-year-old cap for being able to have the Google Plus account and everything you need to physically sign in.
I see. Okay. In terms of strategies, what are I think that I've noted, like, 8 was the magic number. Oh, you have to get to 8, and everything I read was, you know, oh, up until 8, and you know, I just couldn't wait to be 8, and then I got to be 8, and you know, it really didn't change dramatically, but I get the sense that there's a big difference between the strategies of 1 to 8 and then the strategies of 8 to 16. So, what are the strategies of 1 to 8 first, and then how do they differ once you get from 8 to 16?
Well, leveling up from 1 to 8 is mostly about leveling up, getting to 8. Really, you're making lots of links, you're building up lots of portals, visiting different portals, trying to grab gray portals when you're especially low level and you can't take out stuff by yourself. When you get to level 8 and beyond, it's more about strategizing, conserving your resources, knowing, like, deciding which portals to take out, which to not, and meeting up with other agents so you can actually get more supplies. Because you have to, in order to get level 8 gear, you have to hack level 8 portals. In order to have level 8 portals, you need to meet up with 7 other level 8 agents and make level 8 portals.
So kind of like 1 to 8, you can play solo.
Right. I mean, you can play solo when you're level 8, but it's a bit harder because the resource requirement makes it more of a social game, if you will, like a team game.
Yeah. Also, in the early levels, you know, all you need to level up is AP. You know, it's the equivalent of like XP in most games. They're action points in this. So all you need is AP to level up from levels 1 through 8. But once you get past level 8, you'll also need badges. And so you'll have to, there's a lot of badges in this game. If you've ever looked at badge ecosystems, this game is a great example of how to implement badges in a really, really good way. But you'll need to achieve, yeah, you can see on one of the phone screens being held up there. So you'll need to achieve and unlock certain badges to get to each successive level. And some of those, as you go higher, the badge requirements become harder to achieve. So that can direct your gameplay a little bit more, because if you need like the highest level badge, instead of doing a little bit of everything, you'll get really focused on one type of activity that you like. You'll so people will start to specialize a bit more.
And I think part of that is also you're dealing with people opening up within the community, where you start to see that they gravitate towards the aspects of the community they're more interested in, where you might see some of those level 8+ players really focus on welcoming the new level 3s, 4s, and helping educate them on all the cool stuff that you don't necessarily know about. A lot of people don't know that glyph hacking is a thing, and that there's this entirely different mini game built into Ingress that you can play and maybe get some more resources out of. That you've got a lot of people dealing with the both the cross-faction and the inter-faction politics of, as you're dealing with global initiatives where you want to have a link going from one country to another. That's not something that you can just decide as a faction. It's you need to work together, as I think Thomas, you were mentioning, this is a global endeavor, that you're really collaborating to make sure that you've got the fields cleared for that.
Right, and it could take a lot of coordination, planning. I mean, depending on the size of the field, it could take a lot of work. Like in South Florida, there we called it Bahama Mama, where you basically got like 80 million mine units covering. It was north of Lake Okeechobee, down to the Bahamas, down to somewhere in Esmeralda and the Keys. So we had to get people all over the state, drive down to the Keys, fly to the Bahamas. It was actually there's only one airport open because the rest of them were closed due to the hurricane that was nearby. So it takes a lot of work and planning and effort.
Yeah, and some of the areas of specialization just get to be insanely interesting, where there's a lot of players right now who have become informal experts on the law, because one of the aspects of this game is these portals need to be at publicly accessible areas. But they do not need to be at publicly accessible areas year-round. So I've got some friends out in California who keep fighting over a location called the Point of Conception, which is only accessible at certain times of year during low tide. And as you're running over to this lighthouse, you need to be on the lookout for, and I kid you not, wild boars. And to manage getting over to this location, not only are you thinking, will these pigs be going after me? I know, hearing the stories of these people going off to the area are just fascinating, but they need to work out, is this someplace that we can legally go to? Will we get in trouble for being there? Do we need permits to get out here? That some of the Russian players, one of the players ended up going out somewhere in Siberia and getting permission from the government to go out to this location. You'll often hear stories of people renting small planes, going out on helicopters, because then they have this story of, look at this crazy thing that I did, and look what it did for our team.
It's wonderful.
Kay, you were going to say something about communication, a kind of...
Oh, okay, and I get, and here's the thing: I don't have the in-depth knowledge that the rest of you have, but I have been using Ingress really as a way for educators to learn about games and game mechanics. First of all, getting them on a mobile device, understanding that a pervasive game means you can walk around. It's not just in front of the screen. Letting them, they get to see augmented reality. They get to walk around, and just about anywhere they go, something might be popping up. And then having discussions about this. And Thomas had already mentioned about the communications and also dealing with people across the world. This is another layer to it that we are discussing with educators. I was at a recent conference, and actually what got them really excited about Ingress was the use of Slack. Okay, I was at a conference, a lot of IT guys were there, and when I started mentioning Slack, that's when everyone got really interested that our universities are using this to manage the IT calls. And it's the same thing that people are using to organize communications with this game. So it suddenly became a better discussion on how exactly communications happen in these games, and how it's not the lone wolf syndrome. And so that's really what I kind of wanted to mention, and I thought that maybe Cynthia might be able to say about how us showing some of these game attributes, you know, how we're trying to slowly educate an educator, you know, our educators about something like this.
Well, it's this notion of, oops, am I on screen? Okay.
Yes.
I don't normally go on screen, but it's this notion about participatory. You mentioned collaboration, communication, etc., but you're also creating. You're involving and weaving in other elements, right? And then, of course, this notion of the mission and the user-created missions. A lot of opportunity there for vested interest. In fact, you saw Tanya's face when he said the game will end at some point. You know, you're getting this sense of ownership, and it was funny. I was trying to figure out. I've downloaded the game twice, but I have not played. And the first time was like 2 years ago when someone in Spain, one of my former students, you know, asked me to play. And I said, okay, let me go look. And so I grabbed it, but I was struck by indecision because I'm the kind of person who has to know something about the factions before she joins them, right? So I started studying the area in Colorado, and I kept seeing Smurfville this and Smurfville that, and I kept thinking, well, it must be blue, right? And so, but I couldn't figure out why people were one thing or another. And being me, I have to know a little bit about why. I can't just run out there and do things, right? Because I have to know the consequences of them. What's interesting is as I was doing research, and I don't know that this answers your question, but I noticed that it was banned at Schriever Air Force Base, and I used to work out there. I used to be with Air Force Space Command before I was a professor, right? So as a software engineer, I was very interested in that. And they said, yeah, there's a portal right outside the gates, but not inside, and yet there's a guardianship or something inside. And I thought, So I think that's very interesting. And of course, people were indignant that they couldn't go, and that's a closed base. You can't even drive on, right? Not even if you have a security clearance. I used to have to schlep everything in through the portals. So that's not surprising that we have secure areas, but it increases everyone's curiosity. And I think that's the fascinating part about this game, is that it gets everyone talking, working, acting, a level playing field. Some of the little interviews I looked at were by people who never play games. So I think that's very interesting. But anyway, I love alternate reality game because it's a great equalizer. Anyone who has a device can participate, right? And so that's the magic in it. I thought it was very interesting that that Niantic separated from Google+, and so that's one of the questions I have is why did that happen?
And you want to talk about Pokemon probably too, or have somebody talk about Pokemon.
Yeah, so I'll say something about that. So you know, Niantic, Google obviously throughout its history has had a lot of internal projects, and John Hank, who's now running Niantic, also played a major role in the starting of Google Earth. So if you're familiar with Google Earth, then you know his history goes back to there. And so Niantic was formed within Google, but of course you've seen Google has recently gone through the transition to Alphabet, and lots of things have spun out of Google for various reasons. So not saying that this was directly connected to that, but Niantic also spun out of Google just recently. And many of us, when we heard that Niantic was no longer a part of Google, did share some concerns about the future of Niantic. You know, are these guys really going to be able to stand on their own? You know, selling us a free game that has only limited monetization strategies, as we would say in the business world. And then we were very pleased to hear that that Niantic struck a deal with Nintendo and the Pokemon Company to build Pokemon Go, which will easily be 10 times bigger than Ingress, because Ingress has about 500,000 players, and of course the Pokemon universe is huge. And so we're very excited about that. And then also just last week, there was an announcement that Google and the Pokemon Company Nintendo have invested an initial $20 million in Niantic with a promise of another 10 million if they hit certain milestones. So their financial security looks much better now, which, of course, for all of us who love Niantic, makes us very excited.
Mr. Anderson, what do you know about Endgame?
Yeah, and part of the evolution that Niantic was always looking to go in for Ingress was that they were thinking that you have this location-based platform that other people can tell their stories in. So Endgame was planned out, and I've got the book here with me, but Endgame was planned out to be a combination of a book, an alternate reality game, the mobile game, and then also a film. And it was really looking at telling a single story across multiple platforms, with Endgame being the Ingress-like mobile game version of that, where, and I think they're still looking to come out with the beta of Endgame Proving Grounds, which is a very player versus player focused version of Ingresss, where instead of having it as player versus everyone, where yes, people are competing over limited resources, but it's a free-for-all between the factions. With Endgame, they are looking to have it be you are battling another player and randomly being challenged to that, while still having the same core mechanics in terms of the location-based storytelling. Part of Endgame is also recently, for the first book, there was a puzzle hidden within the pages of the book that the person who just recently solved it, I think a week or two ago, got $500,000 for solving that puzzle. Book 2's out, the bounty is $1 million on that book. So part of it is also you are having, for the fans of cryptology, ways to dig a little deeper there. Pokemon Go is very much going to be a question mark, but based on the trailer, it looks like we're probably dealing with a merger of those two ideas, where there is some player versus player elements that were shown there, where you can have Pokemon battles against other people, as well as more of what you're seeing from Ingress in terms of everyone gathering together to tackle a single challenge, where in the video they had a bunch of people gathering in Times Square to take down a Pokemon called Mewtwo.
Okay, we have a question about, I mean, we are educators after all, and this was about school. Chris, I'm thinking slide number 13. We kind of skipped around our slide deck. We didn't go in order, but that's okay. But we did have a question about examples of using this in schools. And on slide, I guess the slide that Chris got up, no, yeah, that's the one. The potential for learning and training, because of course we're talking about young adults and perhaps adults. And these are just some images that came to mind about some potential things. But have you actually seen this used in schools, or do you see the potential? And gosh, everybody can weigh in on this one, because you're either a student or a teacher.
Well, actually, if I can say something, you can actually sort of make it like a scavenger hunt, like a mission, and like go to these places, go to like a place beforehand, design like a question for them to answer, and in order to answer the question, you have to like look around and try to find the answer on the memorials or on a historical plaque or something like that. So you have to look at the portals and look around. So it's sort of like a scavenger hunt. I've heard of that been done, but I'm not so sure if it's been done for in the education.
I guess, I mean, I was thinking about the thing with the telephones, and possibly you could have teams, group in twos or triads of children, a group of 3 or 4 children together with a device, if the device and the plan becomes a problem. Especially with younger kids, although I think everybody's got a smartphone these days. Anybody else want to weigh in on the education, learning, training, all you college professors out there?
I can give 2 examples of how this was practically used in universities, not necessarily for Ingress, but for other similar programs, where a couple years ago out of Indiana University, there was a game called Skeleton Chase that was very much oriented around the same idea of send people out within the Bloomington community and send them on missions to actually experience a story while they're having learning go in parallel with that. And particularly for Skeleton Chase, part of what they were doing was a research project as well, where they were seeing, can we use games to motivate people to move more? And the answer was yes for that. So part of it is you can build your curriculum around these games, where if there are particular lessons and particular skills they need to build, you can load those into the challenges. The other example is more of a free form, where out of USC, their film program adopted a card game called Reality, where the students would go exploring around the campus and get these cards that would be challenges, where it would say, okay, you've got a card that says radio, so you can combine that radio card with a protagonist card, and you're challenged to tell a story with a protagonist using radio as a medium. So in that case, it was a co-creation challenge where you had this framework throughout the campus as a voluntary thing, where you were working on building those stories together.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen other games that have done something like that, like the Battle of Lexington out of MIT. It was a graduate project where all the players were kids or students, and they were taking their handheld devices out to the actual battlefield, and then of course, curating, archiving, that, collecting data, etc., and of course stories. It's not the sort of thing I do as often. I'm one of those terrible gamers who doesn't get out.
How about you, Kay?
Oh, it's another reason why I'm looking at it for the missions. Last week when we did the pervasive games things, Farah and I talked about Project Outbreak. I think that you could set up some similar storyline that you can set up puzzles and have students investigate along the way. How much you want to make it into an alternate reality game, well, that depends on your imagination. But for ISTE coming to Denver for the conference, I definitely see a Tesla versus Edison kind of scenario going on, and I see Cynthia's already happy about that. that we could, and you're muted, Cynthia. So we only see.
No, I just
say
Tesla. Okay.
I know. Who are we gonna get to be Edison? I don't know. Enlightened people, I guess. But but I'm really thinking I mean, first of all, we want to use it for the conference so people can see it, but I think that we can develop missions that, even if we can't put a lot of content in the actual game of Ingress, we can think of other ways, whether it's us getting some chalk and putting a symbol on a building. We'll do it, or putting a flyer up somewhere, or telling them on the thing to switch channels, go over to something else. We'll figure it out, okay? But I think alternate reality games, myself and Chris, who's not on mic today, we've used them before for our classes, whether they've been mysteries or whether epistemic frames, and I think we can do this. I think Ingress can be used. Can be used to help this. And then of course there's always making students do the stories themselves, which always takes it to another level.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the advantages of alternate reality games is it both is a platform where you can exercise creativity of working with literally any platform you're comfortable with, as well as being lower barrier to entry in terms of game design, where you don't necessarily need to know how to program Unity to work out and build an alternate reality game. Right now there's an experiment going out of Columbia University called Sherlock Holmes and the Internet of Things, where a bunch of people are just gathering together and constructing a global mystery where different locations are going to be giving different puzzles and clues to what's going on with it. But it's just a bunch of different game design meetup groups across the country and across the world working together to tell this story and playing to their own strengths.
You know, when my office was over at the local college a few months ago, and so for lunch, I would go out and walk around the campus. And my office had moved because it was in a different location before, and I really got to know this campus. I got to know where every statue, every building, everything was. And then, like, as school started getting, kids started coming to enroll in classes, they would ask me, do you know where such and so was? And of course I knew exactly where that building was, past the brown cube in the middle of the lawn that nobody knows what it is, because I had played this game. And of course what struck me is what a great way to do, it's not necessarily a game, but to do an orientation with college kids who, are coming to a university, who need to know where all these buildings are, and that kind of a thing. So it might be a fun thing to do any kind of an orientation, not just for college students, but say a staff that needs to learn a large campus. And of course, that started me thinking about people who need to know their community, because the thing I hear most often is, I learned things about my community that I didn't know before. I never knew that was there. I hear that all the time. And I think about emergency workers, firemen, policemen, people who deliver packages, taxi drivers, people who, how do they learn? And of course, I know this is not supposed to be in a car, but that is one way to learn your community, is to play this game. I know where everything is at my end of town. If Chris, could we go to slide number 12, please? We've kind of skipped around, because now I would like to ask the panel if they would respond to this question: what have you personally learned from playing this game, or from studying this game, or games like it, and how it relates to those 4 C's of the 21st century skills that we are feeling are so critical for people to know these days? Whoever wants to start.
Well, I'll just take it, and I'd have to say I'm pretty low level. So personally, it has been communicating and understanding ideas, collaborating. I haven't gotten into the creation part of it yet. I'm a lower level when it comes to that. And the critical thinking and problem solving, it's more my observing critical thinking and problem solving, and just watching the communications in my area. It's great to see how everyone is deciding when, and I'm resistance. It's great to see how everybody makes the decisions on when to go after the enlightened, and when they know somebody might be coming, to do a drive-by, and they might be coming after the portal. I love seeing this. So I think as I go further with this, I'll be able to see the others, and as soon as I make this for a class, I'll be able to align it with these 21st century learning skills, or the student learning outcomes from my college. It'd be easy to put critical thinking, effective communication, information and technology literacy would be really easy to just like staple on and do the alignment.
Cynthia?
Hey, yeah. Listening to everyone, I was going to go enlightened, and of course most of Colorado is resistance, right? Well, that just confirms it for me. While it is about collaborating, it's also about creativity, and many of us love an underdog, right? And we also love this notion of a story that keeps evolving, whether there's, we're not sure which faction, and perhaps the people who have played forever are sure. I'm not one of them. We're not sure the mystery behind the factions. We only know what we're told or what we've discovered. And I've watched a few of the videos. I've read quite a few of the forums, because I find it fascinating how people are evolving the story themselves and how they take it in new directions. So the critical thinking, problem solving, I could see that directly applicable with the crypto quizzes and all the cryptography going on. But I also think of it in terms of strategy. The thing I was thinking about is this an easy game for new people to start playing, right? If most of the city is blue and you start out as a green, how easy is that, right? But that also adds a level of challenge that makes it rather intriguing. I may have to actually get out and go check this out. And I do see a lot of airports, so Over to you.
So I'll say, in terms of communication, absolutely, tons of communication. In fact, I don't think I've been part of so many community channels at once as I have been since I started playing this game. So that's a huge one. Critical thinking and problem solving. Yeah, when you're trying to plan operations, and you're involving a lot of people, so you've got the collaboration going on there, but then you have to think a lot about your geometry, and you're drawing along the maps, and you're trying to figure out how much time will it take me to drive from point A to point B so that I can throw this link before the checkpoint at 8 p.m. And you're kind of planning all this stuff out. And if I need to have 3 people over here, when do I need to tell them to do their thing? So you've got a lot of that going on the operations side. I have delved a little bit into the cryptography. I'm certainly no expert at it, but I've learned a lot more about it since playing this game than I ever knew before. And I was very thrilled the first time I was able to successfully decrypt something on my own. Of course, by the time I did it, lots of other people had already done it, but I was still very proud of myself for figuring it out. And then more recently, just in the past few weeks, I've become very involved in the storyline side of it. So I'm now part of the Operation Essex community. Just throughout this whole chat, there's been a live channel going on because one of the storyline characters popped in and said something, and now everyone's in a frenzy about implications of what's going on in the story. So there's all sorts of excitement constantly going on with the evolution of the storyline. And in that aspect, when you're part of Essex, you do actually start getting into the creation, because when you start posting things as part of Essex, you're actually driving the storyline to a degree as well. It's pretty cool.
I know we're going around, but I had one more thing to add. This reminds me so much of live-action role-play, not in the sense of costuming or any of that, but in the sense of story that's current or in the real world that you weave into this fictional story that allows everyone to have creativity and a vested interest in it. And that's what really makes those kinds of games exciting.
Yeah, and I think for me, feeding into that, one of the things that works really well with alternate reality games like Ingress is that it inspires me to think about new ways of looking at communication challenges. Where there was a game a couple years ago that told its story completely through error messages in a casual online game. And just the idea that you can tell a story through error messages is amazing. Mm-hmm. And it gets me looking at things, and I think, okay, I've got this book. What can I do that's more than just reading the book? That I've got this YouTube channel that I'm watching. What can it be more than just a video?
Thomas, what did you get out of the game so far? What have you learned?
Well, personally, the most significant thing that I've got from the game is not to be such a social reclusive. I have to go meet up with people, and really, I'm not really an extrovert. I'm really an introvert, but having to meet up with people, getting in contact with people in order to achieve goals in the game, to put up a field, or just contacting you on the campus, just trying to get you active.
Actually, I have a very specific question for you, Thomas, because I know we talked about this. Looking at, I know you're a political science major, and I'm wondering if there's any correlations at all with the green and the blue. And I mean, I look at South Florida, and I noticed that the east part of town is really green, and the west part of town is very blue. And what does that mean? And worldwide, have you found any correlations politically or, in any of your studies that, gosh, this makes a difference in China or Japan or wherever?
Well, one thing I've noticed is that in Asia, there seems to be a lot more enlightened for some reason. I haven't really figured out why, per se, but the enlightened seem to be really predominant and organized and really spread out throughout Southeast Asia, Indonesia, to Japan, to China, and South Korea especially. And then you go to South America, where it's the opposite, where resistance is more predominant. But I think that's because of the cultural interpretations of the word resistance. They have South America has a history with changing governments and resistance.
There might
So
be a
that
paper.
people are
Might
feeling
be a
stuff.
paper in there for you.
Yeah, I think so. I'm more like a
But
master's
for South Florida, I'm not entirely sure. I have noticed that personally. It's just kind of
Okay,
bothersome
well-
from a strategic standpoint, but
All right, so we've got about 3 minutes to go, and I think Chris needs to make some announcements about some coming up events. But before he does anybody have any last words on Ingresss and the potential for teaching and learning, particularly as it relates to 21st century skills? Or do you think we've kind of covered it for now?
No, we haven't covered it. We're going to have to do more panels on it and some papers and maybe even a book. Okay? That's all I have to say. I think we are nowhere near done.
All right. Oops. Next up, Chris, are you going to do this part?
Sure, I can do it. It's not a problem. So next up, we have the 3rd annual Running of the Gnomes. For those of you that play World of Warcraft or are recovering WoWers and always looking for an excuse to get back in the game, they're actually having on the U.S. realm, Scarlet Crusades. There is a bunch of guilds that are getting together, and we're doing a gnome run from the gnome starting area all the way down to Booty Bay. It's in support of breast cancer awareness. So this is an annual fundraiser that this group is doing. And also, it's a really fun event to get through. Last year, we had over 1,500 players gather and make the trek, and we crashed the server 3 times, which was kind of awesome. And then we all came back on. So feel free to join in the fun. Almost everyone there is level 1 and just running around and having a good time. So it starts at 8 p.m. Eastern, and typically takes about an hour or two. We run down to Booty Bay, and then there's some other fun activities that people can get involved with. And it's a great cause to come out and explore the world if you're looking to see what World of Warcraft is about, or if you just want to come and have fun. So next thing we have up is next week, at this time on this channel, we'll have Hearthstone, using a game to learn statistics. So we'll go ahead and do that on the 26th. And the Gnome Run was on the 24th at 8 p.m. Eastern, and that is where the Gnome Run's going on. So with that, thank you everyone for watching, and have a good night.
Thank you.